Agatha Modeste. I was a tutor at first the A-level college, the St. Lucia A-level college. And when the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College was established, the A-level college assumed a new name because it was then part of the wider college. So the name became the Division of Arts, Science and General Studies. And the status, I would say, and name of former tutors changed. So they became lecturers. So I was first a lecturer and later on a senior lecturer. For many years, after studies, after I returned from studying for my master's, I was transferred to the Department of Continuing Education and I became an assistant coordinator in the department. And after 4 years or so, I was appointed Dean of the Division of Arts, Science and General Studies, which is what it was named then, following the first name of St. Lucia A-level College. Okay. My early interaction with him was from a distant, if one can speak of a distant interaction, because as far as I can remember, he always held a senior position in the Ministry of Education. And from a distance, I saw him as a stern, cold, impersonal person. Later on graduating from Teachers College, my interaction with him was minimal, but even then I saw him as unyielding, even autocratic, and I did not like that. So when I think of Mr. Thomas and of my dealings with him in my later years, I can't help but quote something he himself said, and it went like this: "Tant feta, tant quiteta." It's applicable because in the course of time, as I interacted with him, that view of him, that perception of him changed. How did that happen? I was from time to time in senior management. And I remember the first time I actually made Mr. Thomas laugh. We were looking at the visit of the Queen. We were surveying the grounds, and I guess government officials were considering where to make her visit. And we were at the A-level college, and I said, look at the Hess site, Hess school. That would make a good conversation piece. And Mr. Thomas thought the statement was funny, and he laughed and laughed and laughed, and he kept on repeating, a good conversation piece. And I said to myself, Mr. Thomas is laughing with me. And later on, at senior management meeting, there were times when the two of us would get to the meeting room before other members, and we'd sit and talk. And he always commented on my attire. And he said he has an eye for clothing. He did not tell me then that he had been an apprentice tailor. Later on, I'll tell you when that later on came, he got that exposure to tailoring. And I took the opportunity to tell him that some of my clothing was made by deceased Mr. Carson Miller, a former member of staff. And so we would chat, and I found myself feeling relaxed in his presence. So that view of him changed gradually. There are very interesting things about Mr. Thomas. I say interesting, and I got to know those interesting things because I decided, when I was at continuing education, I thought continuing education should be a repository of many of the records of the college. So we recorded and safeguarded many things that happened at the college. And I thought I should write a biography of Mr. Thomas because his successor, Dame Louise, had made a presentation on his retirement, and I kept that presentation. And when she retired, somebody else made a presentation about her. And then she was replaced by Dr. Ford. And I thought, well, we have something on Mr. Thomas, on Principal Weezy. Why not Dr. Ford? And I wrote about Dr. Ford. And then I said, why keep what people have written? Why not write myself? So I decided to write about Miss Leton, Dr. Weezy, and Dr. Ford. I have done the writing, and I have been able to present it to each one of them. So I went to Mr. Thomas's house to interview him. I interviewed his wife. I interviewed his friends. And I came up with interesting information. I'd like to share one of them. I already mentioned his father thought he should learn a trade and sent him to learn tailoring. As a matter of fact, with what he acquired, as I said, he had an eye for clothing, fine clothing. He used that eye, whatever he acquired, to purchase his wife's clothes. So he's the one who purchased her clothing. Mr. Thomas lived in Vieux-Fort, and traveling from Vieux-Fort to Castries was not at all what it is now. It was extremely challenging. We take going to Vieux-Fort for granted. We can get to Vieux-Fort in an hour, but in those days, one had to be up at 4 and travel a long, winding road. And as a young teacher, taking exams every year, he had to be prepared and come to Castries for classes. So Mr. Thomas and his friends decided to tutor themselves to avoid the challenge of traveling to Castries. So that's what they did, and they were successful at the examination. So this is one thing people ought to know, that he and himself and his friends taught themselves and prepared themselves for the examination. While he was a teacher at Vieux-Fort, Father Charles Jess, a historian, a St. Lucian priest, a historian, musician, took an interest in him and saw that he had a skill in music, encouraged it. But Father Jess was transferred to Castries and encouraged Mr. Thomas to follow him to Castries. And immediately he made him head of the choir, the church choir. It was not a cathedral then, and the choir of the RC school, which is where he was assigned. And in time, his interest in music grew. He took several courses. He was particularly interested in Gregorian chant, that's what he told me. And afterwards, he studied the kind of music that prepared one to write an anthem. He did not know then, at his young age, that he would be exposed to, he would be one of those required to write, well, not required, competing to compose the St. Lucia national anthem. So he used those skills to write the anthem. I started by saying, "Tant fait tant, tant quitté tant." And I like to use it when I think of myself and Mr. Thomas. But I also said there are two dimensions to it. One, in time, my perception of Mr. Thomas changed. The second is that after following Mr. Thomas's retirement, he stopped driving. His wife drove him. And people thought his wife was lucky, because husbands don't often allow their wives to drive them. But later on, she herself stopped driving. I was assigned to drive, because they were my neighbors, I was assigned to drive them back home. I was assigned to drive Mr. Thomas to a funeral. Not only did I drive him to the funeral, his wife arranged for me to use her parking spot somewhere in town. But when I went to church with him, I sat next to him and helped him turn the pages of the leaflet. It then struck me that I was looking at a different Mr. Thomas, a new Mr. Thomas. I felt humbled. It was a learning experience for me. because I saw myself down the road and I said, yes, I will need help. I will change if I live long enough, and I will need help. I will depend on someone whom I least expect, probably, just as Mr. Thomas was leaning on me to help him. And as I said, it made me feel, it was insightful, but it was humbling. And I also felt privileged, very privileged, to help him then. When I told you I prepared a biographical outline on Mr. Thomas, and in the course of doing so, I spoke to his wife, I spoke to his friends, and I also spoke to other senior members of staff who had worked with him. And there was one thing in common. They all said Mr. Thomas was a man of vision. I came to that conclusion myself because I marveled at the change I saw. I was associated with the school from a long time ago, 1974. I saw the changes. And when Mr. Thomas came on board, the college literally catapulted into more changes. And it is because of the quality of the person at the helm. He was a man of vision. And all those who worked with him, they said other things, but one thing in common was Mr. Thomas was a man of vision.